Good evening. I'm Pat McCrory. For more than 200 years, elections in this country have been run by the states, but pressure from both parties over voting rules, ballot access, security, and trust is pushing that system into new and untested directions. The question isn't just about politics, it's about confidence in the vote and whether centralizing power fixes problems or creates new ones. Tonight, we're joined by someone who's been inside the election system at its most consequential moments. Ben Ginsberg is one of the most experienced election law attorneys in the country, a longtime legal advisor to national campaigns, and a key voice in the debate over how America runs its elections. He worked at the highest levels of presidential politics and served on bipartisan efforts to improve election administration. Join us from Washington, D.C. Please welcome Ben Ginsberg. Ben, it's great to have you on Unspun.
Thank you. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So this new debate, and it's really not a new debate, but an old debate that's coming up just recently regarding voting, who has control of voting at the federal and state level. And right now, President Trump and the Republicans want more control out of the federal government. What are the constitutional issues with regard to this?
Well, the Constitution is pretty straightforward and plain. Article 1, Section 4 gives the states the power to set the time, place, and manner for elections. There is a clause in the Constitution that says Congress can pass laws, especially to deal with federal elections, those for the Senate and the House. There is no mention of the President of the United States in the Constitution. So the idea of the president being able to decree a voting law simply doesn't have authority in the Constitution.
So this is very similar to the executive order debate that we've had during the last 4 administrations on executive power versus having to go through Congress. In addition, state power and local power, but it has to do with voting. Am I correct there?
Yes, I mean, honestly, the voting sections of the Constitution are much plainer than many of the other executive order controversies that we've had recently. And, you know, Governor, it's worth noting that for years and years, Republicans have been opposed to a federal approach to elections. That the theory of the party, the doctrine of the party, has been that this should be a state and local function. And so this current round of the debate is really atypical for what's been argued in the past.
We've had some recent flip-flops on both parties on state control versus federal control, and there's no consistency with either party. But you're right, among Republicans, we were the ones, I'm a Republican, who said elections should be controlled by the states. And in North Carolina, for example, the counties have a great deal of influence on how we hold elections also among our own Constitution. So what are the practical issues, not just the constitutional issues, what are the practical issues regarding the federal government having more control over the state government on voting issues?
It's always been sort of a given in the election law area, election administration, that one size doesn't fit all. There's simply differences between what happens on a very local level and what happens on a statewide level. That the way you would set up an election for Charlotte is pretty different than the way you would do it for some of the more rural counties, and you shouldn't impose a uniform stricture across the state, let alone every state in the country. That people on the local level actually know what's best for their communities.
Now, one of the major issues that's arising, especially since mail-in voting, is when do you count the votes and when does the public know when the election is over? And it used to be on election night, we knew when the national elections were over. And now I think much of this debate started is some states are going, no, we'll wait to count or get some of the votes coming in, especially from overseas, could occur 2, 3, 4, 5 days after the election is over. And the president is saying, no, we need to find out now. They need to get the votes in at a certain time. So what do we do if there's a renegade state who could determine the election, especially a national election, and is kind of off the reservation in counting their votes?
Well, there are a number of different facets to that question. First of all, recognize that the outcome of elections are never final on election night. Each state has a procedure to certify the results in local communities and then come up with a statewide number, and that determines the winner. And that takes place 2, 3, or 4 weeks after the election, according to each state. And that's very much up to the states to do. So the number on election night is really a formality. Now, having said that, there are two parts to the issue. One is the practical part, that we want to know the outcome on election night, that there's a tradition of that, the many of the incidents that have occurred in recent years that have caused election dysfunction and credibility to come into account happens because the result is done on election night. Now, as a matter of law, each state has the authority under the Constitution to decide that question, although there is now a case that's going to be argued next month before the Supreme Court that could stop the counting of ballots received after Election Day. But as a matter of law, as it stands now, each state has the ability to extend its deadlines for ballots postmarked on Election Day but received after.
What's your
President Trump, and I think many think that's a bad policy, that it's better to get it done, but there's clear legal authority for states allowing the delay.
What is the historical perspective of this argument about federal control and state control? In fact, where the Republicans and Democrats have rather flipped. What's the most important historical perspective on who controls elections and some of the past struggles?
Well, that's the Constitution, which has pretty plain language on the time, place, and manner being allowed to the states. And in the highly partisan world we've been in for the last 15 years, sometimes the principles that the parties have argued has gotten reversed to find pragmatic outcomes. You know, Republicans opposed the Democrats' election bill in 2018 and 19, the misnamed For the People Act, on the ground that it would federalize elections. So, you know, things have changed.
Now, is there some civil rights history, though, of the federal government stepping in on some major election issues to ensure that we have fairness regarding equality, especially among the African-American community in our country?
Well, that always had to do with access to the polling place, that if there were barriers that denied people their ability to cast votes, then the federal government would step in. And certainly passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act in the 1980s had a great impact on that. That's different from sort of the policy decisions in the states on whether ballots received after Election Day should be counted or not.
So you talk about the Supreme Court ruling on, I think, a very important case coming up regarding, can you count votes after the election day is over, or can you receive votes after the election day over? What do you see with the court's current makeup happening in that case, and what are the major arguments going to be presented?
Well, interestingly enough, the arguments are not based on the Constitution itself. It's based on some 1800s statute called the Elections Acts, and it has to do with the legislative interpretation of what Election Day means. The people bringing the case are saying that Election Day means only Election Day and not days after the election. You know, the history of the country has been to allow absentee mail ballots. Certainly was always true for military voters, and then got expanded in the name of making it easier for people to vote. So the court will decide on the basis of the legislative language and the legislative history, which makes it a little bit harder to predict where the court will come out on this case.
You're with an organization called RightCount, which is trying to increase the confidence and trust that people have in our election system. What do you think we need to do as a country to increase the trust of people having confidence in our election system?
I think the key to that is for people who don't trust the election system to actually go kick the tires of the way they vote and the way people in their state vote. I mean, the difficulty, the crisis in confidence is really poisonous on a national level. But I think people find that when they take the time, if they care about the issue, to really go into their local communities and their states and ask their election officials precisely how the system works, that's a great means, the best means of reassuring people that our elections are reliable.
In the remaining minute or so, what is the one thing that you would recommend that we do to increase the trust of our elections?
Well, I do think it's more than anything else that if people don't trust the elections, they should get involved themselves. Go be a poll worker. Go be a poll watcher. Help out your favorite political party. Look at elections on elections day. See if the way the votes are being cast in your community and your state really are fair. And if when you kick the tires, you see that the system is either reliable, or if you see a fault, then get help for fixing those problems.
Ben Ginsberg, it's been an honor to have a man of your skill and background on Unspun. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Governor.